made by Trump's then personal attorney Michael Cohen to Stormy Daniels in late October 2016. Michael Cohen testified in this trial. He is Trump's former personal attorney. He says Trump directed him to pay the hush money to Daniels in the final days of that campaign, an allegation Donald Trump has denied. Daniels, of course, is the adult film star who has publicly alleged that she had sex with Trump in 2006 and was paid off to keep silent about the affair. Again, an allegation that Donald Trump has denied. David Pecker is another key name in this trial. He is the former publisher of the National Enquirer who allegedly helped broker the deal with Stormy Daniels and arranged to what they call catch and kill the story about the affair between Trump and another actress by the name of Karen McDougal. Pecker has been granted immunity in the federal investigation in exchange for his testimony before a grand trial. So all of that has happened. Karen McDougal is the one other name that I mentioned, a model and actress who has said she had a months-long affair with Trump in 2006 and was paid $150,000 to keep quiet about it by the National Enquirer. Again, another allegation that Donald Trump has denied. But prosecutors have been using the payoffs as evidence that the schemes were aimed at protecting Trump's electoral chances, and thus they argue this is not about his private morals and his behavior and his relationships, but about an attempt to affect the U.S. election. We're standing by. We expect a verdict within the next 15 to 20 minutes, but right now we're going to get some reaction to the speed at which this decision was reached in particular. Jeremy Fogel is a former U.S. District Judge and Executive Director at Berkeley Judicial Institute. He joins us now in Washington. Mr. Fogel, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm happy to be with you.
I had, in my very amateur opinion, mused out loud yesterday that I thought the jury might take some time to deal with this because of the historic nature of this, but here they are, really this the second full day of deliberation. What do you make of the speed at which the jury has returned?
Well, I'm surprised. Normally, when you have this many counts and you have charges that are fairly complicated, you have to build a sort of an infrastructure to get to an answer. It takes a little bit longer. In some cases, when you get a really quick verdict in a complicated case, it's usually an indication that the jury just didn't buy the prosecution's case, so that there might be an acquittal. That's actually what happened with O.J. Simpson, if you can remember back that far. But in this case, I think that's unlikely. I mean, my read on this case all along has been that there would either be a conviction or that there would be a hung jury. That the prosecution built its case very carefully. They had a tremendous amount of documentary evidence, circumstantial evidence. And even though the defense strategy was to look at Michael Cohen and say he was not trustworthy and he was an admitted liar and a convicted liar, the case, I think from a neutral perspective, there was more to the case than Michael Cohen. There was a lot of other circumstantial evidence. And so, you know, I'm surprised that the verdict happened so quickly, but I could see it being a situation where they just said, you know, the government built a very strong case and the defense didn't really rebut it that effectively. So, you know, I have no idea what's going to happen. I was a judge for 37 years and I often was wrong in predicting what juries would do, but I don't think that the speed of the verdict necessarily means that it's going to be an acquittal.
Right. So that's what I wanted to explore. And again, we do not know. And we know a verdict is in. And it was about 20 minutes ago that the jury said they needed about a half an hour to fill out the necessary paperwork. So we're kind of targeting 5:15 Eastern time, give or take, for when we might hear something more. But to go back to what you said about your expectations, Judge Fogel, about how you figured it would either be an acquittal or a hung jury, the speed at which they're coming back, that just throws hung jury out the window, right? It would have taken a long time to get there.
No, there won't be a hung jury. So it's either going to be a conviction or an acquittal. I think maybe I wasn't clear. I mean, I actually thought that at the end of the day, the most likely outcome was a conviction. I thought there might be some holdouts, but I thought that the prosecution put on a very detailed case. Now, it could be that the jury just decided that it all kind of depended on whether they believed Michael Cohen, and if they didn't believe Michael Cohen, and so therefore there's an acquittal. But that's not my best hunch based on what I know about the trial and based on my experience. I mean, if I had to bet, I would bet that it's a conviction. But again, as I said, I think judges are anyone who's been a judge as long as I was, you know that a lot of times you're wrong. And, the juries have I think one of the great things about juries is that they are the conscience of the community, and that they really try very hard to do the right thing, not necessarily what a judge would do or what a legislator would do, but they try to do the right thing based on everything that they've heard. So,
right.
I honestly, I am surprised that there's a verdict this quickly, but my inference is not what it would normally be with a quick verdict, which would be that it means that there's an acquittal. I still don't see that. I think it likely means that there's a conviction, but I could well be wrong. I would acknowledge that right off the bat.
No, I just want to say, and you were very clear when you're saying about the hung jury, but I was kind of building to this point that it's impossible to predict this because it involves Donald Trump, and he has defied the laws of political gravity, and he may very well defy the laws of legal gravity. But there is a decision this quickly, so you seem to be saying that you, in your view, the prosecution put out a very clear case, right? Trying to keep this at about a cover-up to manipulate the election, rather than making it necessarily about sort of the cast of characters, which is an interesting dynamic we don't normally see in trials. But you've talked about the jury and how they're trying to do the right thing. The weight the jury must feel, Judge Fogel, on deciding what happens with the first ever former president and current Republican nominee in a criminal trial must be absolutely staggering.
Oh, there's no question about it. I mean, I can only imagine how difficult this is for the jurors. Just sitting in judgment on a fellow citizen is hard enough, but but when you're talking about a celebrity, or you're talking about a former president, or you have all of the political weight that comes with it, then it's just a lot for a juror to take on. It's a tremendous burden. And I just got a text message from my daughter that it's a guilty verdict. As I said, that does not surprise me. The only thing that surprises me is the speed.
Okay. Judge Fogel, we're going to have to let you go because you are right. We are going to have an alert moving on the wires that Donald Trump has been found guilty of all 34 counts he faced at the hush money criminal trial. This is the jury verdict. They are now reading that verdict inside the courtroom. The CBC's Katie Simpson is in New York City. She has been covering this for us, so we want to go to Katie very quickly. So, Katie, the news moving. Donald Trump found guilty, and I hear from those cheers. He's in New York City, a city he called home. What are your thoughts?
Right now, we are in the park across the street from the courthouse, and we're in the designated area where the Trump critics have been holding their demonstrations. The minute the word came out from the court that there was at least one guilty verdict, we heard screams and cheers. I'm going to mill about in here to see if there's anyone that we can sort of talk to get some initial reaction to this. But there are people who have been celebrating. We just take a look over here. This woman has been down here for quite a few of the days. She was here when Trump was initially indicted more than a year and a half ago. And I remember her as she was sort of out here with this sign. People celebrating on this side of the park. We're going to see if there's any other people here who are celebrating. The one thing I will note, David, is that as these proceedings have been underway and going on, there were far fewer Trump critics than Trump supporters. And hold on, we're going to bring someone in right now. Hi, we're from the Canadian Public Broadcaster. What's your name?
My name is Susan.
And why are you here today?
I'm here to protect and fight for democracy.
So what is your reaction to finding out that Donald Trump is guilty on all 34 charges?
I'm ecstatic that he's finally being held accountable for something.
Did you think this would happen?
I wasn't sure. But, we've been living with Donald Trump for many decades here, and many of us know him as a con man, so it's not surprising to us. But it's really just this was election interference. This was the thing that he always complains about with his fake big lie, that the election was stolen. Everything that he says others are doing, he is doing. He is guilty of. That's Donald Trump.
What do you think this is going to do for his election campaign?
That is a very good question. I have heard that independents have said, if he's convicted, I'm not voting for him. So, and he fought tooth and nail not to have this trial happen because he knew it was bad news. It's also, I mean, it's bad news with women voters, it's bad news with independents. It's hard to know, you know? And I don't know if there was an election interference by Russia and Saudis and people with money, so it's hard to know.
Now, I ask this because of what the world witnessed on January 6th. Are you concerned that there could be, intense reaction from Trump supporters, whether that breaches violence?
Yes, but I think that was one good thing that our DOJ did. They held people accountable for that kind of violence. So I think they're deterred from that kind of thing at this point. I don't really see that happening. I think he's lost a lot of followers. I think MAGA is a minority. I think they're a very loud minority, but they're a minority in this country.
But what do you think about the polls that show that Donald Trump's doing quite well?
I think the polls have been wrong for 4 years. They just said recently that a lot of people who vote in polls aren't voters. You know, a lot of them are landlines. They've been wrong. They've been wrong for 4 years, so I never believe the polls.
All right, thank you so much for your time today. We're going to continue to sort of walk around here to give our viewers back home a sense of just what's going on in here and the crowd that is sort of starting to gather. I think one thing, David, perhaps we should do, you're welcome to follow along with us if you'd like to, but we could walk over to the Trump side of this enclave. Marie and Sean, if you guys are okay with that, we can make our way over. David, let me know if you guys need to go to something else where we can go for a little walk
I think that's
together.
a good idea. I just want to quickly use this as an opportunity just to sort of update people on where things are as you're walking, and please be safe. Safety first, as you like to say.
Sure.
There's been some confusion on the alerts that come out, but it has now been updated that it looks like all 34 counts. House Speaker Mike Johnston has responded to this, saying it's a shameful day in American history, saying President Trump will rightfully appeal this absurd verdict and he will win. So already, Katie, we have swift political reaction. You had reaction there on the streets from Susan, who is obviously quite delighted to find that Donald Trump has finally, in her word, been held accountable on what a lot of people, Katie, if I remember our conversations on this over the past year, saw as perhaps the least serious of some of the criminal offenses that Donald Trump has been charged with. When you look at the election interference case in Georgia, the January 6th event, and the other charges he's facing. But yet, here we are in the second day of deliberations. The jury, after 9.5 hours of total, have found him guilty on all 34 counts.
Yeah, and let's just walk everyone through exactly what we are sort of expecting for the next. Actually, you know what?
You got to.
Is the sidewalk open? Hold on, we're gonna go on the. Hold on, we're gonna go over the sidewalk. The sidewalk had been closed earlier. So one thing that we should remind our viewers, David, is that Trump is not going to be handcuffed. He's not going to be taken away to jail or anything like that. What's going to happen next is Trump's legal team is going to appeal this decision. But in the meantime, Judge Marchand will be setting a sentencing hearing, likely in the next couple of weeks. Come along, we're going to still keep going in the next couple of weeks, and then that's where the decision will be made. So we're walking right now along the back of sort of Media Row because they've cordoned off this park to ensure that the Trump supporters and the Trump critics are not sort of intermingling just for safety purposes. When Donald Trump was first indicted here about a year and a half ago, there was concern that the crowds could become volatile after what we all saw on January 6th. So go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering, so you're making your way. So the way this has worked, Katie, if you can help me understand this, like obviously the Trump supporters and the Trump detractors are not mingling outside the court. They're separated. So you're making your way to where the Trump supporters have been gathered. Have you seen any signs of activity or reaction at all from your vantage point at this point?
Not just yet. So it's been pretty quiet from that side, which is pretty remarkable because it has been the louder side. It's the Trump detractors. Very few of them have been showing up, but that's not the case now. So we're going to make our way in here to see if there are any Trump supporters who might want to chat with us about what has gone on here. This is history.
So, Katie, are you there right now? Are you in the Trump section, for lack of a better word?
We are. We just got in here. So we're in here now. But you know what, David? I want to say I think it's more reporters. It's a lot of reporters. I'm just looking to see if the Trump people, normally the Trump people are pretty, oh, you know what, David? We're going to come back to you.
Okay.
Just give us a minute. We're going to come right back to you.
Okay, Katie, sounds
Okay,
great.
we'll come right
So
back to you.
CBC's Katie Simpson doing remarkable work on live television, walking through the streets of New York to cover this breaking news. Former U.S. President Donald Trump found guilty on all 34 charges in the hush money case brought against him. David Weinstein is a partner at Jones Walker LLP and a former U.S. federal prosecutor. David Weinstein, we spoke last night. I did not think this was going to come quickly, but it came fast and it came down hard on the former U.S. president. What is your reaction to the guilty on all counts verdict?
Well, I thought it would come by the end of the week. I didn't think we'd hear about it today, but the fact that it came this quickly, I was not surprised that it was a guilty verdict across the board. I never thought there would be any split verdicts. They were either going to find him guilty on all counts or not guilty on all of these counts. And look, the jury had some questions that they asked this morning. They wanted testimony read back. It's clear they listened to the closing argument that was presented by the prosecution, and they corroborated the testimony that was provided by Michael Cohen. They really didn't deliberate for more than, perhaps just closing in on 10 hours. A lot of that time was spent listening to the reread and asking questions. But the fact of the matter is they agreed with the prosecution on this case and didn't hold much merit to the arguments made by the defense.
In some of the instructions to the jury, which they asked the judge to repeat, Judge Mershon, he talked about inferences, gave them specific instructions on that, and used the example of if you walk outside, and it isn't raining when you walk outside, but you see wet cars, you see puddles on the ground, people in raincoats and people carrying umbrellas, you can infer that it was raining. And in this circumstance, he's essentially saying that you didn't see any of these actions by Donald Trump, but when all the evidence around him suggests he was involved in it, you can infer that he did these things. And it seems as if the jury really paid attention to that and came to that conclusion. How do you read it?
Well, that's entirely permissible. Look, I've used that example myself in the cases that I've tried. That's the classic traditional, we want you to consider circumstantial evidence. As a prosecutor, I used it to do exactly what was done here. If the ground is wet, it either was raining or somebody left the sprinklers on. And look around you, see what else corroborates one side or the other.
David, I just want to interrupt you for 1 second and let you finish that thought. I just want to tell our audience what they're watching. We have a picture up on the screen. That is a huddle of Trump's legal team. That might be his son, Eric, there. You can see the blonde hair of Donald Trump poking out right there. As he is walking out, he is coming to the microphone. We're going to listen in.
Mr. Trump, how did it go being convicted of felony? Are you worried about going to jail?
This was a disgrace. This was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble, but this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Why should voters vote for a convicted felon?
Okay, that was former U.S. President Donald Trump reacting to a history-making verdict, series of verdicts in a New York court as the first former U.S. president to be convicted after a New York City jury found him guilty on all 34 counts related to the hush money trial, a conspiracy that Donald Trump is now found guilty of being a part of to pay money to Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels, using his lawyer, Michael Cohen, and the publisher of the National Enquirer, David Pecker, to pay them to cover up his sexual affairs with those two women to avoid influencing the U.S. election. Donald Trump, as he often does, punctuated his statement here with really a saturation of grievances, calling this a disgrace, a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt, arguing that this was stacked against him by not being granted a change of venue and being forced to go to trial in New York City, linking it seemingly to public opinion polls by saying, or at least voter results from the last election, saying that they were at 5 to 6% in this area, and then going on to say that November 5th will be the real verdict. And that, of course, is the election day in the United States. And he took aim at his opponent on that, Joe Biden, saying that this was a process brought by Joe Biden to damage his opponent, and spoke about his views of the state of the country in the United States, harkening back to his warnings about American carnage, of people streaming into the country, and things being out of control under the watch of a Democratic president. But Donald Trump, not stating whether or not he would appeal, though we can, I think, safely assume that he will, in fact, do that. His legal team, the Speaker of the House, Mr. Johnson, has already said that he anticipates that, but calling this a disgrace, a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. David Weinstein, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but I'm sure you can understand precisely why I felt the need to do that. What did you make of that reaction that Donald Trump just had?
It's expected. You know, he set the stage for it yesterday when he made a statement about Mother Teresa. He actually listened, it sounds like, to his lawyers, because he's enunciated a couple of bases of his grounds for appeal. They're going to start with the change of venue that was denied before this trial even started, and then they're going to run through the litany of things that they complained about throughout the whole trial. And judges on a court of appeals are going to consider the evidence that was introduced, the objections that were made, whether or not the overwhelming amount of evidence that was introduced supported the conviction, and they will have the final say here on whether or not this conviction is going to stand. The next step for him is going to be July 11th, not November 5th. That's when the judge set this case for sentencing. And look, the possibility exists that he could sentence him to incarceration, but that's not going to happen, and he won't serve any time, if at all, until after the appeal's been decided. And that's going to take place well after November the 5th. So his response was expected, and it'll be interesting to see what he has to say as he goes forward on the campaign trail. Now, remember, that gag order is still in effect because the trial is over, but the case still lives.
When he comes out and says a conflicted judge who was corrupt, that seems like he's probably violating that gag order in some way. Is he allowed to do that, David Weinstein? I mean, that feels like a big contempt of court thing.
Look, the judge has a very thick skin. And what the judge has said throughout these proceedings is, if you want to attack somebody, you can attack me, the judge. Jury's off limits. You can't talk about them. You can't talk about the witnesses. But if you're going to attack somebody, attack me. And he's been attacking him throughout. And so, you know, at this point, what he's said so far, that doesn't violate the gag order. But let's see how far he goes and what he encourages people to do to this judge. That might be a different story.
So we were discussing last night where the evidence was and what you thought on sort of the strength of the case, and we were going through the instruction to the jury from the judge about the ability to draw inferences based on, you know, all of the circumstantial evidence rather than things you'd necessarily seen or categorically viewed. So knowing that he is likely to appeal, to certainly try to get his freedom, have this conviction overturned and push it beyond the U.S. election, where do you think, based on what we've seen of the evidence, and who knows what the Trump legal team will come up with, where do you think their grounds could be for appeal? Would it be going for the judge, or is there something in the evidence?
No, I don't think they're going to go for the judge here. They're going to go for the jury instructions. They objected to some of the instructions that were given, including the one perhaps on circumstantial evidence. So they'll say the instructions were flawed. They're going to object to, and they have objected to, some of his rulings with regard to the restrictions on what questions they could ask, what witnesses they could provide. One of the witnesses they wanted to put up was somebody who was going to talk about federal election rules and how that impacted the case. And so that's another item that they're going to be going after. They're going to certainly go after the instruction with regard to the fact that the jurors had to find him guilty or not guilty unanimously, but they didn't have to agree necessarily on what the crime was that he was covering up. That'll be another ground that they're going to look for an appeal. And they will certainly, argue that he was convicted based on the testimony of Michael Cohen alone and not of others. But the Court of Appeals is going to look to all the other testimony of all the other witnesses, as well as documentary evidence that's existed. So quite frankly, that's probably their weakest argument.
You're a former federal prosecutor, and like every journalist, I read a lot about Watergate, right? Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein. And even President Nixon was not convicted, despite what led to his resignation as U.S. president. He was pardoned by Gerald Ford for all those reasons. To bring healing to the country, really, it was the argument that President Ford made at the time. I just wonder what your thoughts are on just the historic nature of this. I mean, Donald Trump has been busting norms since he went down that elevator in Trump Tower and launched his political career, escalator, excuse me, not an elevator, to run for president. And now he makes history in a very notorious way. Just what are your thoughts on the significance of what we've seen here today?
Every time we've seen anything happen with this individual, it's always followed by, we've never seen anything like this happen before. He's got 3 other criminal cases that are still pending that need to be resolved. This is an historical moment that's going to overshadow everything that happened with Nixon, with his vice president, Spiro Agnew, and his tax fraud conviction, and even the pardon that Nixon was given by Gerald Ford. This is monumental in terms of our system and the people who are in charge and the people who are in control. And this verdict itself, these jurors found that he interfered with the election that put him in office. And so to some degree, that would call into question that election as well. I've never, I'm not that old, but I've never seen anything like this. And our country's never seen anything like this. The question is, will we recover? What's going to happen with the people in the United States? And how is this going to affect the upcoming election?
Yeah, those are very big questions, but you make a good point there, David Weinstein, at the end that he was found guilty of interfering with the election that put him into office. An important point that needs to be underlined. David Weinstein, thank you so much for joining us today, joining us last night. We appreciate your insight and your analysis. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Okay, just to recap our top story, Donald Trump has been found guilty in his first of 4 criminal trials, this one relating to a hush money payment made to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Prosecutors argued it was an illegal conspiracy to undermine the integrity of the 2016 election, and the jury found him guilty on all 34 counts of falsifying business records. After the verdict was read, each of the 12 jurors stood and confirmed their decision. Trump is the first president in U.S. history to be convicted of a felony. A sentencing date has been set for July 11th. We're going to go now to the CBC's Katie Simpson, who is live with us again. Katie, you have been in the area that you said where the Trump supporters have gathered. What's the reaction been to this news?
David, it's mostly media. The Trump people that we've been seeing out here day in, day out with their flags, with their merchandise, I'm not seeing them here today. It's way more media than it is Trump supporters. There were far more people on the anti-Trump side who sort of seemed to flow into the park very organically. It didn't really seem planned. No one was expecting this to happen. The judge was preparing to dismiss everyone from the day. When I was making my way past this park, most of the Trump people who have been camped out here for most of the days, they had already appeared to have left for the day, and we're not seeing any of those individuals that we've talked to so many times here. There are some people who are shouting. There are some people with signs, but it's not the usual Trump people that we've seen down here. So it's a bit of a muted response. I'm going to bring it right over here, David. There's a gentleman over here who's having a bit of a reaction. We're going to see if he's got a Donald Trump shirt on. It says #1 fan. He seems to be crying and yelling, but and he's saying, I hope, let's go see if we can talk to him really quickly to see if he wants to talk. Sir, can we get your reaction?
It's not good. It's not good. It's not anything that anybody should have to see. I'm disgusted. This is a tapestry of justice. I'm not very happy right now.
Okay, what's your name? Where are you from?
I'm Jake, and I'm from Chino, California.
So were you expecting this to happen?
What? That the New York blind lady justice would think that love is a crime? No, I didn't think that would happen. No, I didn't think they would find him guilty of love.
All right, we're going to pull out of this. We're going to pull away, and we're just going to sneak on over and try and get a different sense of what's going on in the crowd. Are you a Canadian? Are you a Canadian? What are you? Are you here to check things out? We're live right now on Power and Politics. Are you here to just check things out?
Yeah, I work a few blocks away. Our whole office celebrated. We all came down here. It was fun.
What's your name and where are you from in Canada?
I'm from Toronto. My name's Ben.
Ben, so have you been watching this? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've been overkill in terms of the coverage. So I just kind of like, you sort of receive it as kind of white noise, eventually it's just like kind of, it's everywhere. So I mean, I've been following it on Twitter, but I haven't really been watching the news so much.
So you just described something to me there. You said when you guys got word, can you walk me through what the reaction was and what you did?
Well, we all kind of just like, watched my laptop together. We all sort of like, freaked out a little bit, and then we all said, weren't we there? Let's all go down. Let's check out the scene. And so we walked 5 minutes, and now we're here. That's my staff right there. Yeah.
Is it what you expected?
Yeah, more or less. You got your Trump supporters on this side, you got other people on that side, but yeah, more or less. It's like somewhat subdued, I guess. But, I wish we were kind of here when the verdict was read out. I would love to see that. But yeah, now it's cool. A lot of news cameras, a lot of interviewing, a lot of different opinions. Yeah.
All right, we're going to keep walking around. And so, David, it is a bit of a muted reaction, certainly on the Trump side of things. We're in this area. It is way more media than actual pull. There was an organic cheering and sort of an excitement in the crowd on the anti-Trump side as soon as that first guilty verdict became public information, as soon as everyone saw it on their phones. But in terms of a reaction, an immediate reaction in front of the court, things are pretty subdued right now. There are a few people who are identifying themselves as Trump supporters, and they're sort of being surrounded by a whole bunch of reporters who are all trying to sort of get reaction from them. But we're not seeing the Trump regulars who we normally do. So yeah, it's more subdued than perhaps had been expected. But again, as we heard from that conversation from the woman who is a Trump critic, that perhaps Americans are afraid to have very strong reactions in the wake of what happened on January 6th.
Katie, what has not been subdued is the reaction from the former president himself, who called this a disgrace, a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt, blaming Joe Biden for using the justice system to target him as a political enemy. We're showing a shot now of what we believe to be the vehicles, the motorcade that former President Trump would be leaving the New York courthouse in. We have a tweet, Katie, from Donald Trump Jr., also not understated like the crowd you're in, saying, guilty on all counts, the Democrats have exceeded in their years-long attempt to turn America into a third world pit hole. Not pit hole, but rhymes with pit hole. November 5th is our last chance to save it. And we've seen a statement from current U.S. President Joe Biden saying there's only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, and that is at the ballot box. So Katie, let's talk a little bit about the political implications of this, right? Our last guest, David Weinstein, who's a former federal prosecutor, says Trump has now effectively been found guilty of interfering in the election that put him in the White House in the first place. Trump says the real verdict in all of his trials will be on November 5th. I mean, things with Trump are almost impossible to predict, but, what's your first impression of what the political implications of this will be? Because the trial likely pushes all of this past the election.
Yeah, because Donald Trump has tried to use his legal problems to his political advantage, right? He sells merchandise with his mugshot on it. He's not seeing any sort of major dip in the polls, or at least he hasn't. He easily won the Republican nomination, or he'll formally be crowned the Republican nominee later this summer. But he's on his way to become the Republican nominee for president. His legal troubles did not really get in the way of that, and if anything, we saw that it energized his base. I've been at all of the primary events, or most of the primary events, where you go to the crowds, you go to the rallies, you chat with people who are waiting in line for hours, blocks to go in and try and see him, and they often repeat some of the lines that we hear from Donald Trump himself. They talk about how they think the charges are corrupt. They think that Donald Trump is only being prosecuted because he is running for president and because he is Joe Biden's opponent. Donald Trump and his supporters, as well as his re-election campaign, they haven't presented credible evidence that backs up any sort of claim that this trial is by any way was in any way rigged or anything of that nature, was anything other than, a free and fair trial under a court of law here in the state of New York. So that is sort of what the Trump campaign is expected to do. It'll be interesting to see what the fundraising numbers are going to be over the next couple of days to see whether Donald Trump sees any sort of funding boost. Often the campaigns will send out a news release to tout historic sort of collecting of those election dollars. And so we'll see if the campaign gets a boost from this. This is American politics. American politics is incredibly unpredictable, so we really don't know what this is going to do. But if there's any indication, Donald Trump's ability to sort of gain sympathy from his supporters, if they're concerned that this could hurt his campaign, you might see a flood of those campaign donations.
Katie, it's interesting that the politics of this, I mean, our old boss Rob Russo used to joke that Donald Trump is one indictment away from the presidency. But the interesting thing about this is that even though he's convicted, the New York Times is reporting that there is no legal prohibition to Mr. Trump running for president as a convict or even serving as president if this conviction stands. Sorry, go ahead.
Yes. I was going to say, I did an entire long-form current affairs piece on The National about this. There are very few things that actually prevent someone from being U.S. president. You got to be 35 years old, you got to be a U.S. citizen, and you got to live in the country for 14 years. Donald Trump meets that criteria. It doesn't matter if you're convicted of a felony. It doesn't matter if you're facing charges. He could be in jail, and it wouldn't matter. They'd have to figure out a way to get him out so he could serve his term in office. Those are the only three sort of sticking points in the Constitution that are disqualifying bars for someone. So yeah, no, this can happen. Other trials can happen, and it does not weigh any sort of, it doesn't have any sort of weight on the outcome of who gets to run or the election itself in terms of whether he's allowed to or not.
But here's an interesting thing, Katie, that he can run, and he could serve if he wins. But voting for himself could be a problem now that he is technically a convicted felon, because Mr. Trump, while he was associated with New York, he has officially moved his residence to the state of Florida, where Mar-a-Lago is. Florida, which requires felons to complete their full sentences, including parole or probation, before regaining voting rights. So with Election Day on November 5th, Trump having to appeal, his conviction stands. He can return to Florida and go to Mar-a-Lago. He cannot vote for himself in his new home state in this election because of this conviction today, which is just another bizarre first in the presidency of the political career of Donald Trump.
Yeah, everything about this moment is historic. And yeah, that's the thing, right? He is from, Donald Trump now has his residence in Florida. I'm just going to keep on a bit of a shouting match here, but we are going to back out of here. Just take a step back. David, I think the next time we chat with you after this, we're going to probably head back over to our position in front of the courthouse, because it's really subdued over here, and it's more reporters than it is actual people who are here to either mark this moment in history. That is a random thing, though, Katie, right? Because I don't know if the verdict came in quicker than they were all expecting, but he always draws these crowds. And maybe it's because of the location in downtown New York. That's why. But how small is it compared to what you've seen throughout the trial in the couple of days that you've been in New York this week? I see one gentleman in a Trump hat surrounded by about 20 reporters. Does that sort of put it into perspective? No, we've seen this before. This is sort of what happens sometimes at these events. The location is definitely probably one factor in this. This is not exactly an area where Donald Trump is popular with voters. There had been a steady group of voters coming out every day, but I don't see them anywhere here. They were gone by the time I got here this afternoon, and they're not here. But really, it's largely reporters and largely camera people like my wonderful colleague Sean and my wonderful colleague Marie, who's a producer here. And we've been chatting with people, but again, it's not the usual Trump crowd. It's quite subdued, and yeah, people are sort of just walking around and just checking things out.
So, Katie,
I think we're okay. I think we're.
You okay? You need to move, or you're there? What do you need to move and relocate somewhere better and safer, or where are you?
Oh, no. Oh, we're completely safe.
Oh, okay,
no.
okay.
I think we're going to back up just a little bit. Why don't we just back up a little bit, just because I'm sort of having some trouble hearing you a little bit.
Gotcha.
We're just going to back ourselves up and sort of back up into the crowd. And there are Canadians here who want to come and chat with us, and which we love hearing from Canadians, but Canadians don't get to vote in this election. So we're going to hopefully chat with some Americans about what they think. But I think we sort of, in terms of like the Trump supporters, I think they're largely not here like they were earlier today. It's a lot of media, a lot of onlookers. There's a couple of police here, but by no means is this unsafe. It is not. We are completely safe here. We are completely fine here. It's not like what we've seen at some other rallies, but largely it's media coming in to chat with people to get a sense of how they're feeling. So that is sort of what it's like out here. Our colleague Alex Pineda, David, I should say, today happened to be the day that he was on the foreign pool. So what that means is he gets a seat inside the court. So Alex Pineda actually witnessed Trump's reaction in the court. I suspect you're going to probably want to chat with him at some point. But today happened to be the day that he won the lottery to get a chance to get a seat in there to actually cover this. So he's been sending out notes to reporters because there are so many reporters who want to go in, but there aren't enough seats in the courtroom. And so he was sending that the moment it was announced that the jury had reached a verdict, there was shock. No one was expecting it, as I mentioned. And I'm just going to pull up the note here from Alex with a few more details. He sends a note saying, "Guilty, guilty, guilty," read 34 times by the jury foreman. He said there was no audible reaction from Trump. He sits stone-faced. Eric Trump was the only Trump child who was in the courtroom. He was seated in the first row behind his father. He said it was very tense in the first few minutes before the verdict. Trump was talking with his lawyer, but the jury was called in around 5:03 p.m. Eastern time. No one appeared to be staring at Trump, according to Alex, who was watching in there. And by 5:07, a mere 4 minutes later, he had been convicted on all 34 counts. Mershon, at the end of everything, according to Alex, said that's a long thank to the jury for being away for their families. And by 5:12 p.m. Eastern time, all of those jurors had filed out of that room. So there's going to be a sentencing date in mid to late July because Trump is busy with other court dates, according to Trump's lawyer said that in court. They say the standard is about 6 weeks. So the first sentencing date is going to be July 11th at 10 a.m. So everyone's going to want to be paying attention. July 11th, 10 a.m. And David, I'll send it back into you for now.
Can he just interrupt you, Donald Trump? I think you're finished. We're getting a shot of him leaving the courthouse now, going out to the, there are 3 black SUVs. It looks like a cadre of his legal team, security. He still has Secret Service protection. And of course, there's always some members of his family in that particular entourage as he moves. So Katie Simpson, we're going to say goodbye to you. I know you have other commitments on CBC Radio and other places to speak as we say goodbye to Katie and watch Donald Trump say goodbye to the courthouse as he is now in that vehicle. You see the security personnel speaking into their cuffs of their shirts as they communicate with each other through the telecommunication systems they have set up. But Donald Trump walked into that courtroom today as a former president. He leaves today as the first former president in U.S. history to be convicted of a felony, as a jury has found him guilty on all 34 counts. After less than 2 days of deliberations, a total of 9.5 hours, not even 10 hours of discussion amongst the jurors on what to do in terms of dealing with the case that the prosecutors had put on the table. The Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg brought the case against Donald Trump. I anticipate we'll be getting reaction from the Manhattan District Attorney at some point today as we stand by and watch to see if Donald Trump is going to leave. Now, when Donald Trump is going to leave. We saw his reaction earlier in the show. We're going to replay that in a little bit once we see what happens with Donald Trump here in his motorcade. He called this decision a disgrace. He took aim at the judge, calling him conflicted and corrupted. And said that the real verdict in this case will come on the 5th of November. Now we see the first vehicle moving away. Donald Trump is in that one that is just starting to move right now. That is the black SUV that he got into as he prepares to leave the courthouse. As Katie was telling us, the first sentencing date will be on the 11th of July. Donald Trump is certain to appeal this, and the appeal process will likely push it past that November 5th election. He has linked this trial and the charges against him to his political opponent, U.S. President Joe Biden, claiming without any proof or any clear substance behind it that the Biden administration was behind these charges in an attempt to damage his opponent. But we saw throughout this trial his former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen, testify that he was part of a conspiracy to pay hush money to Stormy Daniels, the adult film star, who also testified to cover up the fact that Donald Trump had sex with Stormy Daniels in 2006. All of this part of an effort to avoid this information from getting out and influencing the 2016 election campaign. This was a case about election interference, the prosecutor said, and today the jury of 12 New Yorkers found Donald Trump guilty of all 34 charges, meaning, as our guest David Weinstein said earlier, that Donald Trump has been found guilty of interfering in the election that put him in the White House and put him in the Oval Office. You can see people lining the streets there of New York as the former president who once called New York his home city. Trump Tower is there. He was famous for his real estate developments and possessions in that city. He's since relocated to Florida, but he's driving through the streets of the city that he once called home and where he rose larger than life throughout the 80s and 90s, becoming a television personality, appearing in movies like Home Alone 2, the star of The Apprentice, the very successful show on NBC. And now he is the first U.S. president to be convicted of a criminal offense, guilty on all 34 counts. There is Donald Trump leaving through the streets. Let's play some of the tape of what we heard from the former U.S. president earlier, his reaction to the guilty verdict against him.
It was a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt. It's a rigged trial, a disgrace. They wouldn't give us a venue change. We were at 5% or 6% in this district, in this area. This was a rigged, disgraceful trial. The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people. And they know what happened here, and everybody knows what happened here. You have a Soros-backed DA, and the whole thing. We didn't do a thing wrong. I'm a very innocent man, and it's okay. I'm fighting for our country. I'm fighting for our Constitution. Our whole country is being rigged right now. This was done by the Biden administration in order to wound or hurt an opponent, a political opponent. And I think it's just a disgrace. And we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end and we'll win, because our country's gone to hell. We don't have the same country anymore. We have a divided mess. We're a nation in decline, serious decline. Millions and millions of people pouring into our country right now, from prisons and from mental institutions, terrorists, and they're taking over our country. We have a country that's in big trouble, but this was a rigged decision right from day one with a conflicted judge who should have never been allowed to try this case, never. And we will fight for our Constitution. This is long from over. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was the former U.S. president less than an hour ago reacting to the verdict of the New York jury that found him guilty of all 34 counts, saying essentially that this is a disgrace, a rigged trial by a conflicted judge who was corrupt, and blaming, of course, the Biden administration, and then taking aim at what is happening in the United States, sort of painting the doomsday scenarios that often punctuate Donald Trump Sr.'s political speeches. I want to show you a tweet from Donald Trump Jr., the son of the former U.S. president, reacting to this. There's a bit of profanity here, folks, but it's an adult show. Guilty on all counts, the Democrats have succeeded in their years-long attempt to turn America into a third world shithole. November 5th is our last chance to save it. So if anyone thought a guilty verdict, 34 counts in all, would change the nature of the Trump family and the Trump campaign, that does not appear to be the case. We did not hear from any of his lawyers today or any of his legal advisors. We only heard from the former president himself and from his son, Donald Trump Jr., on a day of political and legal history in the United States, as Donald Trump becomes the first former president convicted of a felony. We're going to bring in Adrian Arsenault, the host of The National, the CBC's chief correspondent. Adrian, you have seen many, many things in your travels around the world in your career. Nobody has ever seen a day like this with a former president being convicted. What are your thoughts as you watch this?
I think they're very tentative. I think what happens next is incredibly important and incredibly unclear. I've been watching reaction. I think I know you have Katie on the ground there, and I know she's looking, physically to see what people do. But I think words are going to matter here in the next little while. We've been looking to see, and all these papers are because we've been looking to see what other former leaders have faced criminal charges and have been convicted, and how many of them have returned to office. Well, we've got quite a long list of former leaders who have been convicted. Ehud Olmert, we know Benjamin Netanyahu is on trial for fraud. Silvio Berlusconi, after he left office, in Malaysia, South Korea, Pakistan, all sorts of leaders have faced it, but only one, Jacob Zuma, who, there's an ongoing corruption trial with him. He has faced charges related to money laundering and racketeering, but he's also running for office. So this is the only other example that we can find right now. So in other words, it's extremely unusual. Right. I have noticed too that, and you will note this as a reporter as well, that you often get unsolicited emails from various political campaigns all the time. Within seconds of the verdict, there was a spam email from Carrie Lake. This is a woman who is definitely a Trump supporter, who probably wants to be VP. And her language was echoing precisely what you heard from Donald Trump there, the Soros-connected judge, the fraud, the corruption, all the words that you've heard. This is very clearly going to be Trump's playbook. I haven't seen a campaign email from the Trump campaign on this yet. To me, that's a little unusual because normally we see them within minutes of things happening connected to Trump. So it is possible that this will have rattled them more than they are letting on. Trump allies in the first few hours of deliberation, keep in mind the jury only deliberated for some 11 and a half hours, but in the first few hours, you could hear some of the Trump affiliates saying, well, there's one juror who's interesting, who's looking at people strangely. They were setting the tone for a hung jury, setting the tone for they anticipated that there would be an acquittal. It seems that they are surprised that this happened as quickly as it did.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson on Fox News is saying this is the end of the fairest justice system in the world. So the reason why I'm being sort of slow and tentative here is because there is a lot of hyperbole right now floating in the air. And one thing we know that the world doesn't like is instability, particularly instability in the leadership in the United States. So a moment like this one unnerves people around the world. I'll be interested to see what happens in various capitals as they react and wake up. Let's watch stock markets. It's very important to see what happens out of the White House. So far, the reaction is very low key, which I think is their plan. Their reaction is go vote. That's all we have to say. Go vote. So I'm hesitating here because we cannot predict what is about to happen. You hope that cooler heads prevail everywhere.
Well, Adrienne, you make very good points. Making predictions about anything to do with Donald Trump has been a fool's game for quite a number of years now. And who knows what a verdict like this could unleash in the United States. We all remember January 6th. You mentioned Carrie Lake, who ran for the governor of Arizona not that long ago and is a full-on election hoax or election denier, in that Republican tradition of the MAGA wing of the party, who is running for Senate in 2024. You mentioned the White House and the reaction. I want to show you what Joe Biden has put out. This is on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days. There's only one way to keep Donald Trump out of the Oval Office, at the ballot box. And that goes back to your point, Adrienne, that essentially the Democrats are saying, vote. If you want to stop him, you need to be mobilized. Joe Biden has been struggling with a number of issues, as you've reported on The National, as Katie Simpson and Paul Hunter and the others in our bureau have written about for us. in terms of an unenthusiastic electorate because of the spillover for things in the Middle East, the state of inflation, the state of the cost of living. Donald Trump has benefited from this, and as you're saying, Adrian, with the emails that you received very early on this will be a fundraising a moment, because not only is it the campaign expenses, there are all the legal expenses that Donald Trump has to deal with, and the campaign and the Republican National Committee has essentially been restructured to be a fundraising wing for Donald Trump's many financial concerns. But he has been a chaos agent in his political career, and this is a moment we've never seen before, so who knows what comes next.
Well, I think we need to pull out a little bit here, David, because it's very confusing for people. If you're trying to follow the Trump trials, plural, you really do need some sort of guidebook or pin chart to try to figure this out. This is the first one to be completed before the election. This is the first criminal one. This is why there has been so much attention focused on this one. It's not the only one. There are other civil trials happening. Other things will happen. We haven't even heard about January 6th yet. So there have been a number of polls that have been looking at how people will vote, are likely to vote. And look, American elections, this far out from an American election, take those polls with a grain of salt. However, we looked at some of them last week on the National, and there was a very clear drop in terms of people who said they would vote for Donald Trump. Republicans would vote for Donald Trump if he's found not guilty. It's here. If he's found guilty but no time, here. And if he's found guilty, it drops. So that's interesting. But where do they go? Those same polls demonstrated a flat line for Joe Biden. So what people will be looking for is if people are turned off by Donald Trump, those who'd thought, well, I might vote for him. Oh, now he's a felon. I'm not sure I can do that. That doesn't mean they're going to Joe Biden. So where are they going? This is the question that will haunt politicos until November. Where are the people who are suddenly uncomfortable about Donald Trump and were comfortable before going to go? Are they not going to vote at all? Are they going to vote for a third candidate? Is Robert Kennedy Jr. Celebrating today? Is this a good thing for him? Because they don't appear to be going to Biden. And that is why, in these very early days, caveats galore here, there is hesitation in particular. The White House is not going to poke its head above the parapet too much on this because they don't seem to see political gain for themselves in his loss in the courts today.
There are 159 days until the U.S. election day. I know it seems like a long time, Adrian, but that's going to come at us fast. And I like you, I wonder about what today has unleashed, right? This is the first one, and in some ways with the Georgia election interference, the January 6th case, the documents case, this one, by some people, was seen as like the least, as presenting the least amount of jeopardy to Donald Trump, because it kind of dealt with his personal life, and Karen McDougal and Stormy Daniels. But they put it together as an election interference case, and he is now being convicted of interfering in the election that he won in 2016.
And in terms of what we were talking about in terms of the emails, yes, to me, my unscientific survey, Carrie Lake was first. However, minutes later, Michael Gold is reporting on the Trump campaign here, saying that, yes, the Trump campaign sent out a fundraising email in which Trump said in all capital letters, "I am a political prisoner."
Right.
So that's a narrative you're going to continue to hear. Other people are watching, reading other types of tea leaves, looking at Trump's Truth Social and saying, oh, interesting, Trump media shares have dropped by 9% after the conviction. Well, let's see. Let's see.
Adrian Arsenault, host of The National, CBC chief correspondent. Thank you for joining us on a very busy day. I have no doubt what your lead story will be tonight. So lots of coverage ahead on The National. Adrian, thanks so much. Good to speak with you, as always. Okay, we're going to go back to New York, recapping our top story that Donald Trump is found guilty of all 34 counts in his first of 4 criminal trials, this one relating to the hush money payment made to adult film star Stormy Daniels. The CBC's Katie Simpson is standing by as she has been moving around the streets of New York City in and around the area of the courthouse where Donald Trump, we just showed him, leaving after reacting to the verdict. Katie, what's the latest from where you are?
I have a special guest, David. I'm going to bring in someone who was in the courtroom, witnessed history. Come on in, Alex Panetta. You know him, you love him, my good friend, our wonderful colleague down in Washington, D.C. Alex, okay, walk us through. You're in the courtroom, you're sitting waiting. I know we were all waiting for Judge Marchand to dismiss the jurors for the night. What happened? Describe it.
Yeah, so one thing I just point out to the audience here, that this little ticket here got me to witness a piece of American political history. So I was part of what's called the Foreign Press Pool. 4 reporters from different international news organizations that were in the court to share our notes with other journalists from around the world. And at 4:15 this afternoon, Judge Marchand basically informed the courtroom that this day was about to wrap up. He was about to excuse the jury. Left the room, came back a few minutes later and made an announcement that drew audible gasps in the courtroom. People were shocked. He said, "We have a verdict." The jurors just informed me that they have a verdict and they are going to deliver that verdict. Please pardon the noise here. It's New York City. And we're going to deliver this verdict today. And we just need another half hour to write up, fill out all the forms. And so that's exactly what happened. 5 o'clock, verdict comes back into the room. Nobody looks at Trump. Every single juror just walks back in, walks past Trump's desk, nobody making eye contact, which is never a very good sign for the defendant, walks into their box. Within 3 minutes, they'd made Donald Trump a convict 34 times.
So describe what Donald Trump's reaction was when that first happened.
It was relatively impassive. Now, it's worth noting that the judge had warned the parties not to react audibly. So this is a courtroom. I want to keep it serious. No reactions. Trump did not audibly react. He sat stone-faced, impassive. But what happened at the very end, again, jurors walk out of the room, again, all 12 of them not looking at Trump directly in the face as they walk past him. Trump gets up, walks out of the courtroom, and gives his son Eric a vigorous and long handshake, one of these, arm-pulling handshakes. Eric was the only one of his children in the courtroom today. He was in the first row. Trump walked past him, shook his hand, and walked out to an uncertain fate. He was told to come back to court on July 11th at 10 a.m. to hear his sentence for sentencing arguments. And we should point out that's just a couple of days before the Republican nominating convention in Milwaukee.
And so that will be hanging with Donald Trump before he heads off to that big political event?
Like an unexploded bomb just hanging in the political ether of the United States of America. You have, the range of potential penalties for these crimes is head-spinningly vast. You got everything from not even a slap on the wrist, not even a warning, just basically an unconditional release, to conditions, to probation with more serious conditions like not being able to travel to beyond certain states, all the way up to 4 years in prison for each of these 34 charges. You get a range from absolutely nothing to a century and a half in jail. I mean, it's an incredibly vast set of penalties, potential penalties. Very few people expect him to get any jail time. Few serious legal analysts expect jail time. But what's going to happen now could potentially affect that. He's supposed to sit for a probation meeting within a few days where he's going to be asked whether he's guilty. I've been told by lawyers that the absolute worst thing Trump could do now is to deny his guilt. That if he doesn't want to admit his guilt and show contrition, the best thing he could possibly do is just refuse to answer the question.
Is that because it might soften whatever the sentence is going to be?
Because that probation report then goes to the judge in writing his sentence. And a lack of contrition, defiance, doesn't necessarily help him, is what I've been told from people who follow this a lot more closely than I do. And then on around July 11th, maybe a little after that, he'll get his sentence, which, like I said, could be anything from virtually nothing to prison time.
All right, Alex Panetta, witnessing history firsthand. You can hear more of Alex. Okay, first of all, go to our website at CBCNews.ca. You can read Alex's full story. And then, of course, you can tune in to other CBC programs. Alex, I believe you and I are going to be chatting with our good friend Adrian Arsenault, anchor of The National tonight. So we have all of your coverage covered coming up.
All right, Katie, thanks so much. You're the best. Always appreciate you just turning on a dime for us as we need you. But I want to say goodbye to Katie for right now and bring in another guest. Joe Walsh is a former Republican presidential candidate and a former Illinois congressman, and he joins me now. Joe Walsh, it's good to meet you. What is your reaction on a day which America has never seen?
Finally, that was the first word that came to my mind when the verdict came down. Finally, Donald Trump has been held accountable. for his actions. But then the second thing I thought of is, and I've always felt this way, this will not hurt Donald Trump politically. In fact, it may help him. This verdict in this New York City courthouse is not going to defeat him in November. And then my final thought was, our justice system held. That's a good thing.
So, Joe Walsh, the stress test now, though, is on your political system, right? And as you say, you think this doesn't hurt him. Can Republicans stick with him? I know we saw the Speaker, Mike Johnson, say this is essentially echoing, this is a shameful day, I believe is what he said, in American history. He suspects President Trump will appeal. He says President Trump will win. But, you know, we have seen big numbers turning out for Nikki Haley in Republican primaries, even though she's dropped out. So there is a discomfort there with him. How does this affect those things?
This will, and everything I'm saying to you, my friend, it makes me sad to say it because I oppose Donald Trump. This verdict will strengthen him within the Republican Party. This verdict will strengthen his support among Republicans and possibly even independents. Look, we always got to remember this context. 3.5 years ago, Donald Trump tried to overthrow an American election. He's not on trial for that, and he won't be on trial for that before the election. He's on trial for an affair he had paying hush money to a porn star from 15 years ago. Most Americans believe that they either don't care about this trial or they do believe Trump has been treated unfairly. That certainly is the sentiment among all Republicans. So this verdict will strengthen him among Republicans.
So help me understand that in the context of the fact that he did lose the last election. And we saw it because a lot of moderate voters and swing voters migrated to Joe Biden to end the first Trump presidency. Presumably, that voting coalition is still out there somewhere in the United States. And Roe versus Wade and all of these other issues that are so galvanizing for younger voters, for women, particularly in the cities of the United States, and an issue which Donald Trump is taking credit for when it's convenient to him. How does that coalition stay fractured in a way that allows Donald Trump to win?
Well, 2 points. Again, we have the Electoral College down here. So always remember, Biden beat Donald Trump narrowly by about 55,000 votes in 3 states. Yes, he won the popular vote by a big margin, Biden did, but that doesn't count in America. The second point I'd make is when Trump ran against Biden in 2020, Biden didn't have a record.
Right.
Now the voters have 4 years of Joe Biden to compare Trump to. And I can tell you there are a lot of voters who just wanted to be done with Trump 4 years ago. But now they're thinking, okay, Biden's done this. I don't like this. I don't like that. Now there's a record for these people to compare with Trump's.
Joe Walsh, is it inflation? Is it cost of living? Is it the social divisions over Biden's position on the Middle East? I mean, I assume it's all of these things in some function, but 93 indictments, I think it is, Donald Trump is facing, seems to be less of an issue than anything else.
But again, I always remind people, Donald Trump is the only president in American history who lost an election and refused to concede. And that didn't hurt him politically. He tried to overthrow an American election, and the party still stood with him. So all of these indictments and all of these convictions today, this won't make any difference. The American, and maybe it's this way in Canada, we are living in a populist moment in America. The American people are pissed off. They're pissed off about how much stuff costs, and they're pissed off at a political system that's broken. Donald Trump takes advantage of this anger, and he demagogues it. But Joe Biden and the Democrats have never understood, and they don't speak to this anger. That's what Trump is trying to beat and take advantage of this year.
No, you're not wrong on those underlying factors. We're seeing that in countries all across the West where cost of living has been a challenge sort of after the untangling of COVID, and it's threatening incumbents everywhere. It's just very few places have a challenger like Donald Trump with this particular record. And American politics, there's 159 days to your election, sir, and they're going to be a fascinating 159 days. Joe Walsh, former Republican presidential candidate and former Illinois congressman, thank you for joining us on a very busy day. We appreciate it, sir. Okay, we're going to bring in our next guest. Gene Rossi is a former U.S. federal prosecutor, and he joins me now. Gene Rossi, it's good to meet you. Thank you for joining us on a busy day. I wonder what your thoughts are on the fact that Donald Trump found guilty on all 34 counts by the jury in New York.
First off, I think Joe Walsh, Congressman Walsh, is a class act. He's a great guy. And I agree with some of his points, but I disagree with this. If he had been convicted of maybe 10 out of 34, maybe 8 out of 34, but 34 out of 34 counts, I don't care if that trial is on Mars. That is not a good talking point among independents, wayward Democrats, or even within the Republican Party. Second comment is, I love Joe Walsh, but the data show that some of his points are incorrect. A conviction of this magnitude, and this is historic, this is like a tsunami. A conviction of this magnitude is not going to help Donald Trump in the election. Is it going to move 20 points? No, but it's going to cause people to pause. Cause people to pause when they go to that ballot box in November or when they fill in their absentee ballot or vote early. This will affect on the margins, maybe 1 point, 2 percentage points, and that could be hugely beneficial to Joe Biden. But we shall see. We shall see. I'd rather be Joe Biden today than Joe Biden yesterday. Let's put it that way.
Well, on that point, and look, I did not see Trump winning in 2016. So who knows what is going to happen on November 5th?
Who knows?
Right. But, you know, a lot of the supporters that he is preaching to when he came out and says this is a disgrace, Biden was behind it, this is a corrupt judge, there is a conspiratorial nature to the thought process. And my experience is that conspiratorial thinkers, they don't change their mind when confronted with something like a 34-34 conviction. They expand the conspiracy.
I'm not talking about that, sir. Right. Sir, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people, the double haters, the people who hate Trump and hate Biden. They need some reason to vote for Biden. They just got 34 reasons. The people in the independent camp who are leaning a certain way, they just got 34 reasons not to vote for Trump. The people in the Democratic Party, they who are the wayward ones, they now have 34 reasons. But here's what we haven't talked about yet. The conviction is bad. And I love Joe again, but it is bad. But allegedly, there's a tape out there from The Apprentice that just came out yesterday, today, allegedly.
He uses the N-word on this tape, is the allegation.
Let me tell you this. Let me tell you this. In the OJ trial, Mark Foreman swore on a Bible that he never used the N-word, and then they found the tape. This could be a Mark Furman moment for Trump in that Trump's credibility will be further eroded among the African-American community and others within the voting electorate. So this is the worst possible day. And I want to go to the Civil War. On July 4th of 1863, the Confederacy suffered 2 defeats on the same day. One was Vicksburg and one was Gettysburg. And this is Donald Trump's July 4th, 1863.
The phrase double haters is something I am going to steal. His response was not quite the Gettysburg Address, but he was very emphatic in how he viewed this in terms of saying this was a disgrace and a corrupt trial, essentially by a rigged trial by a corrupt judge. Gene Rossi, as a former federal prosecutor, the description from our Alex Panetta, who's inside the court, he said the jury came in, nobody looked at Donald Trump, they didn't look him in the eye. Sorry, are these live shots we're seeing, gang? Okay, these are, Gene Rossi is going to describe what's happening on the scene. They're live footage. It drops in and out as the signal is interrupted, but it is the motorcade that took Donald Trump away. I think that is former President Trump walking right there, surrounded by his security. I'm assuming this is Trump Tower, which would be his refuge on a day like this, returning back there. But he's waving to supporters now who have gathered outside that we can't quite see in the shot. All right, the helicopter is pulling back, or the drone, whatever we're watching here to show. Not an enormous crowd that you can see. All right, it's gone way up into the skyline now of New York City. But Gene Rossi, to go back to what we heard from inside the court, all right, there's a crowd of supporters or people who just want to see, watching. To go back inside the court, the jury came in, they did not look at him, and to get a conviction that is such a overwhelming slam dunk of 34 of 34, as a former federal prosecutor, how rare is that sort of a decisive series of verdicts on what is a pretty complicated paper-based case with witnesses with shaky credibility?
Let me tell you this. I had over 110 federal trials in U.S. courts. And some say that's a record for federal prosecutors. I don't know, but I have a list of my cases. 90 were jury. And I can tell you this, among the criminal trials I've had, to have 34 out of 34, it's unheard of. And here's why. A jury is inclined to throw a bone to the defense, sort of a T-ball trophy. Okay, defense, you did a great job. We thought he was guilty, but here's about 4 or 5 not guilty counts. There could have been a couple hung jury counts, all right, where they couldn't decide. I did think there would be about 10, maybe 15 guilty. So I am shocked, beyond shocked, that they ran the table 34 out of 34. That's why my good friend Joe Walsh, I most respectfully disagree. It's 34 out of 34. There was 34 reasons to consider Donald Trump as someone who has less than pure motives to be the next president of the United States. I can't see how this is a good thing for his campaign.
He's going to appeal, I think we can safely conclude. I spoke with David Weinstein earlier, who's a former prosecutor as well, and he suggested that maybe it might be on instructions to the jury or that sort of grounds. I mean, well, how do you think it works from here in terms of an appeal, what the grounds might be and how long it might take?
Let me tell you, there are appeal issues. Is the instruction that they don't have to be unanimous on unlawful means, is that constitutionally vague? Did the judge make a bad ruling in allowing information to be used on cross if President Trump took the stand? The statute itself is kind of shaky. They have appeal issues, but it's always hard to appeal a conviction when the counts are 34 out of 34 guilty. An appellate court is going to say, you know what? That jury didn't hesitate. And the other thing is, the jury asked to have transcripts read back. And one of the key themes of the instructions in the case was, we can't take Michael Cohen at his word. He's a gloat, the greatest liar of all times. But, liars can tell the truth. So what the jury said to me, figuratively, is that we want to hear what Pecker says about certain events in August of 2015. And if Pecker's testimony is simpatico with Cohen, like bookends, then Mr. Cohen is telling the truth on that topic. And I think that's what happened here. There were certain events and conversations where Cohen was corroborated by Pecker and documents and text messages, and that sealed the deal.
Right, and David Pecker, of course, is the former publisher of the National Enquirer. We're showing pictures there of Michael Cohen. We have a statement from Michael Cohen, his reaction sent to the Associated Press via text message, saying that today is an important day for accountability and the rule of law. While it has been a difficult journey for me and my family, the truth always matters. He thanked his attorneys for, quote, their invaluable guidance and support. So Gene Rossi, I just want to ask you a little bit about that, how they looked at what David Pecker said. They said this may be corroborated. corroborated what Michael Cohen had said. We'll go back to the instructions given to the jury and the guidance from Judge Merchan about the ability to draw inference from things, even if you didn't see it. You know, using the example of you walk outside and it's not raining, but you see puddles, wet cars, raincoats, and umbrellas, you can infer that it rained. It seems like the jury listened to that and came to that conclusion. 9.5 hours is all they spent deliberating. Are you surprised by how quickly they got there?
Well, I heard it was 11, but whether it's 9 or 11, it depends. It's quality, not quantity. And at the end of the day, this is not the most complicated case. I'm sorry. People say it's complicated. It's not complicated. I've tried criminal tax cases that are complicated. This wasn't. But what I wanted to say is, I've said this several times on talking head shows, Tossiography is Victorian practice of reading tea leaves. And yesterday we were reading the tea leaves about what's the significance of the reading back of the transcript and having certain jury instructions read. We now read the tea leaves, and it appears those tea leaf predictions were accurate. That was a bad omen, those two questions from the jury yesterday.
Well, and the reaction from Donald Trump when he said Mother Teresa couldn't beat these charges, right? He said this is rigged. I mean, I know he's always putting himself at the center of a persecution narrative, but they didn't seem to have the boisterousness that's often there with the former president. He just seemed to get more and more deflated as this went on. Do you think they sensed it was coming based on those things?
Putting aside Donald Trump's comparison of himself to Mother Teresa, his comparison to Abe Lincoln, he said it was the best president, even more than Abe Lincoln. Putting all that bloviation aside, his body language spoke volumes. He could see, watching the jury, the witnesses' reaction to the jury and vice versa, he could see that his Titanic is going down. And there were 34 icebergs that brought it down. And I still think it's going to be a close election, but Joe Biden is probably the second happiest person in America. The most happy person in America is probably Michael Cohen, because he has been redeemed big.
I think Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, might be competing on that one. The guy who brought the case, took so much heat, and also stands vindicated today as Donald Trump stands convicted. I mean, this was a gutsy move by Alvin Bragg to do this.
And I want to clear something up. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan, if they hadn't had the former Attorney General Bill Barr and others snuff out this investigation, it's highly likely that even Merrick Garland would have carried the torch and indicted Donald Trump federally. This case was killed by the Trump Justice Department after Michael Cohen had pleaded guilty. And when I was a federal prosecutor, if I had somebody plead guilty and the dude above him who told him what to do, I wouldn't give that person above a pass. My next indictment would be against the person above. And the Trump Justice Department took the guilty plea of Michael Cohen, and the Trump Justice Department took steps, led by Bill Barr and others, to kill this case. And when Garland came in, he basically said, it's been dead for 2 years. I'm not going anywhere with it. So let's clear the air on this. Alvin Bragg, to me, did a gutsy thing and did what should have been done in federal court in the Southern District of New York, in my humble opinion.
Gene Rossi, I really enjoyed meeting you. Thank you for joining us on a busy day like this. That's Gene Rossi, a former U.S. federal prosecutor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We're going to continue our coverage now. We're going to bring in Dave Ehrenberg. He is the state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida. That's the county where Trump's Mar-a-Lago home is. Dave Ehrenberg, it's good to meet you. Thank you for taking the time today.
Thanks for having me, and also for putting me after the great Gene Rossi. He's excellent.
Well, I tell you, I enjoyed that conversation. He did the legal analysis, he did the political analysis, and he gave me the phrase double haters to describe voters who hate Joe Biden and Donald Trump and how this may boomerang them back to Joe Biden. But I wonder if you can help me with understanding something about Florida state law. Donald Trump will appeal this, but he is now a convicted felon. Can he vote for himself in Florida in the election in November 5th if this isn't appealed and overturned between now and then?
There is a 1977 Attorney General opinion that says that you don't lose the right to vote until your appeals are exhausted. Okay. Now, yes, but now whether that opinion remains, I'm doing some checking because it seems to me that you have all these murderers out there who lose their right to vote. Well, actually, they are forbidden forever from voting, but there are other people who have these endless appeals. And I want to make sure before I make the definitive statement that he cannot vote until once the appeals are exhausted. I want to make sure that's 100% correct. But there is an opinion on the books, so I would believe that he would be able to vote for himself.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Like, it's kind of a piece of trivia in what is an historic day, but you know, it is an interesting thing to note because November 5th is 159 days away. Donald Trump convicted in New York on all 34 counts. The city that he was so publicly attached to, he is now, of course, has moved to Florida. What is your sense on this, just you know, as an attorney yourself, as a state attorney, of this moment of the first former U.S. president to be convicted of felonies?
It is history, and it's something that it's sad that our country's politics have come to this, where there are going to be most of his supporters will not change their minds over the fact that their candidate has now been convicted of 34 felonies. And they will listen to him rather than the facts of the case, the evidence, or the law. And they will believe him that somehow Joe Biden was the one pulling the strings here. But I can tell you this, I'm a state attorney. I have the same position as Alvin Bragg has in Manhattan. The president does not communicate with any of us local prosecutors. It's preposterous. If the president ever communicated with any local DA, it would be me because my jurisdiction is Mar-a-Lago. But I can promise you, I've never heard from the White House on anything. And so this was a prosecution by a local prosecutor who followed the evidence and the law, nothing more, nothing less. And kudos to him for having the guts to pursue this, because in the end, the outcome was the way that the prosecutors thought it would be, and the jury validated all the work that the prosecutors did.
It's an interesting point you make there, because your system is so different than the system here in Canada, where it's Crown attorneys, you know, as opposed to prosecutors, and there is a real firewall between any kind of sort of like political connection and dealing with this. Like there's nobody is elected in our legal system the way it is in the United States. But he came out right away, the former president, Donald Trump did, and talked about this, saying this was a corrupt judge and Joe Biden was behind this, and we should have gotten a change of venue because we only got 5 or 6% in this particular area. When you look at all of this litany of complaints and allegations of political interference that Donald Trump is putting out there, I mean, that's for the electorate, I would assume, but is there any legal implications of these as they do seek an appeal? Can they use any of these, do you think, to try to get this overturned or retried in any way, sir?
There are some legitimate grounds to appeal this verdict, but they are legal grounds. It's not anything that Donald Trump has said. All the stuff he's saying is for the court of public opinion. It doesn't matter in a court of law. But the lawyers for Trump will have some grounds. Like, for example, Stormy Daniels was able to get into a lot of detail about her encounter with Donald Trump, and that perhaps was a little too prejudicial to the defendant. That's a possibility. Plus, there's a statute on the books, federal campaign finance law. But can a state prosecutor lean on a federal law to elevate a state misdemeanor to a state felony? We don't know, and that's where there will be some opportunities for Trump to appeal. But right now, he's a convicted felon, and there's no talking your way out of that.
But what's interesting, Dave Ehrenberg, is that, and a little mystifying, that does not disqualify you from running for president or serving as president. That this is not a disqualifying thing. And there has been a lot of discussion about Trump, should he win, of using the presidential pardon power to pardon himself. But this is a state conviction, right? So a president has no ability to pardon themselves for a state crime. Am I correct in understanding that? Just walk me through the implications of all of this.
Yes, that's correct. That's one of the great things about being a local prosecutor is that the president, the governor, the attorney general, they're not our bosses. And the president cannot pardon himself out of any out of any state crimes. We have two separate systems, dual sovereigns, and we don't get controlled by the federal government or the attorney general or the U.S. Supreme Court directly. So no, he cannot pardon himself out of this. He is a convicted felon, and the only chance he has to remove that label will be to prevail on appeal.
As someone who is a prosecutor, I'm wondering what your thoughts are of the sort of the description we got when the verdict was read. The jurors came in. No one looked at Donald Trump. No one made eye contact with Donald Trump. And over the period of 4 minutes, they said he was guilty 34 times. But this was a case prosecuted with the unsavory elements that you talked about, for example, with Stormy Daniels and the particulars of that relationship, but also with a guy like Michael Cohen, whose credibility was very much in question and a difficult thing to bring in, to a trial. What are your thoughts on the difficulty in prosecuting a case with those idiosyncrasies attached to it, but what really comes down to a false records allegation?
Michael Cohen was a key witness, but they had so much corroboration for his testimony that it didn't matter that he had all those problems in his past. He had lied previously. He had felonies, although he was lying to protect Donald Trump. And so what the prosecutors did masterfully was to create this firewall around Michael Cohen, a key witness, to show how, yeah, he may have lied in the past, but he's telling the truth now, and here's proof. You don't have to like him. You don't have to necessarily believe everything he says at all times, but here, he's telling the truth because all the other witnesses corroborate his story. The evidence, the documents corroborate his story. And the defense never really put on an alternative theory to the case that was plausible. And so this verdict was not a surprise. When the jury came in today, at the end of the day, I realized it was going to be a guilty verdict, perhaps maybe not on all the counts, but they were not going to acquit him in just 2 days. There was no chance of that. The best chance that Donald Trump had to escape a guilty verdict was a hung jury. And when the jury came in today, that was done.
Dave Ehrenberg, State Attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, the home of Mar-a-Lago. You may have some interesting days ahead, sir. Maybe not as a state attorney, but just as a resident of that county. I want to thank you for joining me today. Thanks so much, sir.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to bring in a familiar face for this show. Bruce Heyman is the former United States ambassador to Canada. Ambassador Heyman, it's very good to see you again. I think one of the last times we spoke was right after Donald Trump was charged. And I remember you talking about what a sad day it was for your country to see the former president face criminal charges. What are your thoughts on the day he's convicted?
So in a strange and perverse way, it demonstrates that no man, no woman or man is above the law. And that regardless of whether you are a former president of the United States or you're just you and me, average citizen, walking the streets of Chicago or New York or small town Poughkeepsie, we are not above the law. And we are led by a system of rule of law. And so today is a good day for law. It is a bad day for Donald Trump. And it is a complicated day for Republicans going forward as they're about to nominate him officially to be their nominee for president of the United States, a convicted felon. He'd already been tried and lost in a sexual assault and defamation case. He'd already been tried and lost on a tax records and cooking the books case, basically being held for $450 million, more than $80 million. But now this is a felony, and this is serious stuff. And all 34 counts, every single one of them. And so this complicates things for the Republicans. It also, I think, changes the dynamic for the Democrats. And I think if the Democrats don't already have the gloves off and go in here and go at this for what it is, because we're fighting for the soul of democracy in the country. The future of our country is clearly at stake. And after today, you know, if people were guessing whether this was perhaps the most important election of our lifetime, it definitely is now. And so November 5th, you know, we all have to vote, and we all have to ensure that we protect ourselves, and we vote for the person who is a decent person who follows the law, not a convicted felon.
You say this is a good day for the law, a bad day for Donald Trump, and a complicated day for Republicans. What kind of day is this for the United States of America?
Oh, it's a push-pull day. I mean, it's a historic day. There's no doubt. This will go down in history. You know, this man was convicted of something we all knew that he was charged with. I mean, he's charged with nearly 90 counts in multiple jurisdictions. And who knew this would be the jurisdiction that likely would be the only felony jurisdiction that a trial takes place? He effectively utilized the law to slow the wheels turning in Washington and Florida and Georgia, and he tried his best to do it in New York, but that didn't get done. You know, I think from the United States perspective, I think that the judgment of what kind of day today is going to be decided on November 5th, and we'll see where America is and how we value the things that I think we should hold important. I swore an oath to the Constitution of the United States of America, not a party, not a person, and I believe in that value of that Constitution, which was created several hundred years ago in 1776. And what I believe in is that we are a country of laws, and we have different beliefs. I look forward to a day where I can sit down and debate with Republicans the size of government and the amount of taxation and whether we should or shouldn't go in and help Ukraine or women's choice. Those are things that we can debate, and I have very strong views on those, but I believe that that's good for our country to have that debate, a strong two-party system. What's happened to the Republican Party is it's fallen in to this con man, this grifter, this convicted felon. And so, you know, where are we going as a country? I'm going to fight hard to make sure we're going in the right direction. The country that Canada relied on as a partner in the world promoting liberal democracy, and I don't mean Liberal Party or Democrats.
Yeah.
I mean liberal democracy, the right to vote, the right for free speech, the protections that we all valued. In the post-World War II period, it didn't matter whether it was a conservative or a liberal or a Republican or a Democrat. We were arm in arm. What I worry about is Donald Trump and the threat that he'll have to not only America, but to our allies like Canada. And I think Canada should be preparing for that. I hope it doesn't happen. I'm going to work hard not, but it might. And Canada needs to prepare for that too.
Right. So, Bruce Hayman, just to bring people up to speed on a couple of things, we're showing in a split screen with you a podium in New York City where Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg is scheduled to speak. We anticipate that will happen about 7 or 8 minutes from now at about 6:45 p.m. Eastern Time. You mentioned the Canada-U.S. relationship. Ambassador Melanie Joly, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, has issued a statement saying the United States is not only our neighbor, but also our closest friend and ally. Our government has worked successfully with both Republican and Democratic administrations and will continue to do so. So basically preaching that the relationship hopefully will endure as it has throughout a day like this. But I wonder if I could just go back to what you were talking about, what has happened to the Republican Party under the leadership of Donald Trump. The Tea Party was sort of the first sort of big movement we saw sort of coming out of the contract with America and Newt Gingrich Republicans that went through phases. But now we have MAGA. And I don't know if there's ever been anything like that in the history of your country, certainly not at this scale. And I was one of the people who did not see it moving the way it did when Hillary Clinton lost to now former President Trump. I have no idea what this unleashes with that movement. I mean, what concerns do you have about what this could precipitate? Because January 6th wasn't that long ago, and the people who are unhappy with that election result are definitely not going to be happy with these convictions.
Sometimes in politics, you do things that you think is going to really be helpful to you and your party, and then you have unintended consequences. And what I'm specifically addressing is something that we call gerrymandering. And what happens is for all of the members of Congress, 435, they're in these congressional districts, and they're drawn by law in various states. And some states who are controlled by one party want to draw those lines such that it ensures that their party, Republican Party, will get that seat. And where I'm going with this is they did that. very effectively across the country. And now the only threat to those candidates became the threat within their own party.
Right.
And so it wasn't a threat from the other party. And so what happened when Donald Trump became president and the rise of the MAGAs is that he threatened those people. And he told those regular members of the Republican Party that if you don't bend your knee to me and pledge loyalty and follow what I say and vote the way I want you to, I'll primary you. I'll knock you out. I'll give so much money to your opponent within the Republican Party to kill you, such that they then turned around and bent a knee and pledged loyalty to Donald Trump. And so this gerrymandering has skewed the entire Republican Party to the extreme of itself, pledging loyalty to Donald Trump. And those that aren't even threatened in that way saw how he threatened people and how he would get opponents to Republicans, Republicans against Republicans,
right?
That they are all falling in line of loyalty to now a convicted felon.
Bruce Heyman, that's a remarkable point, because I've long felt that Canadians take for granted how Elections Canada works and Elections Ontario and all the provincial, just an orderly drawing of the map based on population, and it's an important thing to have in elections. Bruce Heyman, former United States Ambassador to Canada, I want to thank you for your time today. We really appreciate you making yourself
Pleasure. Be well, everyone.
Thank you, sir. All right, we're going to turn now to Alex Olson, who is a Republican strategist who joins me now on this historic day with the conviction of Donald Trump. Alex, it's good to meet you. I wonder what your thoughts are on this development today and how you think this might affect your country's politics going forward.
Yeah, of course. Well, I will say this to start. I think it's a very sad day for our country. I think we're devolving into a situation where instead of arguing our political differences at the ballot box, as we should in a democratic society, we are deciding to handle our political squabbles in the courts and through lawfare. And I think that sets a dangerous precedent for American politics as we move forward.
This particular case brought by Alvin Bragg, the state attorney, you think this is political because it was a 34 of 34 guilty count on all of the charges against former President Trump? I mean, how should we interpret what you just said to the developments in this case today?
Yeah, of course. I mean, court cases get it wrong all the time. There's appeals, there's an appeals process, convictions get overturned. Humans are not, especially jurors, are not some infallible human beings that don't have their own preconceived biases. There are a lot of folks in the United States that have a strong bias against President Trump simply because there's been millions upon millions of dollars in the media spent slamming him and villainizing him as a man who hates America or a man who hates X, Y, and Z. So in my eyes, these cases predominantly pushed by liberal judges in liberal states against a man who's never had a criminal conviction before and has only ever been in civil trial after he is the president of the United States, I think sets the standard that this is political persecution. You do not think in Republican states that now, because this precedence is set, that they're going to pry into President Biden's personal life and try to convict him on missteps he may have made throughout his career. I think, once again, this boils back to, if Donald Trump wasn't the former president of the United States, this case would have never happened.
Well, no, because it's at its heart, it's an election interference case, right? I mean, that's the allegation here. And why would you prosecute someone who committed these crimes as an election interference case unless they benefited from the crime of election interference? I mean, can't this just be a case that Donald Trump was charged and convicted because he did it?
I mean, with the different elements in the case, such as hush money and all of the above, you can't say that there isn't a preconceived bias from those who are trying to persecute Donald Trump in this field. And I think that because they're seeing the low poll numbers of Joe Biden, because they see that the Democratic Party is eating itself and that we could see another Trump presidency, the Democratic Party and the operatives within the DNC are going to do everything they can, even in the legal sphere, to spin this. And that is the only way that they can get Trump out of the running and a possibility of Joe Biden maintaining in the White House is, I think, through those legal grounds. So am I going to say that every juror on this case is somewhat biased towards against Donald Trump and is this is all pay for play? No, but I think the essence of this case is that the Democrats want to see Trump gone, and they will do anything in their arsenal to accomplish that.
Okay. Alex Olson, Republican strategist. I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay, we're joined now by Brian Stelter, who is the former anchor with CNN's Reliable Sources and a Vanity Fair special correspondent and the author of a book about Fox News that I'm reading right now. Brian Stelter, it's good to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. Alvin Bragg, we're standing by to hear from the Manhattan District Attorney, so if I cut you off, that's why. But what's your reaction to this news today as someone who's covered Donald Trump extensively?
You've caught me in a funny spot and hopefully a revealing location. I'm at the Denver International Airport. I was on a plane when the verdict was read, and I was the only one who cared. And I think that's important context for this news event today, because this is climactic, this is historic. And yet most of the people behind me, you can see some of them, they are choosing not to care that much. That's an American right, of course. How much will people care about this verdict weeks or months from now remains to be seen. But I think it is so telling that at least for this moment, the system worked, the justice system worked, and most Americans are not having some overreaction to it, whether that means celebrating or jeering or condemning. Most Americans are going about their day, and that speaks to the sense of political fatigue and exhaustion and burnout in this country that is partly Donald Trump's fault.
Okay, Brian Stelter, we're going to have to cut you off. I am very sorry. We want to hear from you. We'll invite you back, or you can stick around. But Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, is about to speak, and we have to go to that right now. This is Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, who brought the case against Donald Trump, convicted on all 34 counts today in the hush money trial. The central allegation he was done for election interference. Let's listen in.
First and foremost, I want to thank the jury for its service. Jurors perform a fundamental civic duty. Their service is literally the cornerstone of our judicial system. We should all be thankful for the careful attention that this jury paid to the evidence and the law and their time and commitment over these past several weeks. 12 everyday New Yorkers, and of course our alternates, heard testimony from 22 witnesses, including former and current employees of the defendant, media executives, book publishers, custodians of records, and others. They reviewed call logs, text messages, and emails. They heard recordings. They saw checks and invoices, bank statements, and calendar appointments. This type of white-collar prosecution is core to what we do at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. In the 1930s, District Attorney Thomas Dewey ushered in the era of the modern, independent professional prosecutor. For now nearly 90 years, dedicated professionals in this office have built upon that fine tradition. A major part of our practice during that nearly 90 years has been public integrity work, including cases involving jurists, local and state electeds, public servants, and others. I want to thank this phenomenal prosecution team, embodying the finest traditions of this office: professionalism, integrity, dedication, and service. They are model public servants, and I am proud and humbled to serve side by side with them. The 12 everyday jurors vowed to make a decision based on the evidence and the law, and the evidence and the law alone. Their deliberations led them to a unanimous conclusion, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant, Donald J. Trump, is guilty of 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree to conceal a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election. And while this defendant may be unlike any other in American history, we arrived at this trial and ultimately today at this verdict in the same manner as every other case that comes through the courtroom doors by following the facts and the law and doing so without fear or favor. I want to conclude by expressing deep gratitude to the NYPD and the officers of the Office of Court Administration for securing the courthouse, all of our safety, making sure that the courthouse and all of the other matters that are important in their own right continued seamlessly. They will continue to be and have always been incredible partners. Thank you.
And do you plan to request a prison sentence for this conviction? And do you think that Donald Trump's multiple violations of the gag order that was in place should factor into that request at all?
The judge scheduled a sentencing for July 11th. We will speak in court in that time. He also set a motion schedule. We will speak in our court filings as we've done throughout this proceeding.
Donald Trump has repeatedly targeted you personally and members of your prosecution team. Do you have a response to the former president after this trial is concluded?
I do not.
How in February you decided not to bring a case against Donald Trump? You criticized that. You criticized when you vetted him in March 2023. You criticized when people really started to understand that case. How do you think of all that now, seeing the results of that, and you kind of put that in context with your personal history?
I did my job. Our job is to follow the facts and the law without fear or favor. And that's exactly what we did here. And what I feel is just gratitude to work alongside phenomenal public servants who do that each and every day in matters that you all write about and make the press, and in lots of matters that you don't. I did my job. We did our job. Many voices out there. The only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken.
Could I ask Mr. Steinglass, many people said the prosecution was masterful and flawless. Just want to know how you feel at this moment. Sorry. How do you feel?
Mr. Steinglass, I think some of you probably saw him speak for a little bit the other day. So he's done his job, as has this team. And he just told me, tell him how I feel. I think you said that. I will just say just enormous gratitude. You know, our system, I talked about the jurors at the beginning of my remarks. We have a phenomenal system. 12 everyday New Yorkers. They listen to the judge's directions. They follow the evidence. You saw them in court every day. They were careful and attentive. And so I feel deep gratitude to work alongside them, to be a part of this system. And I just want to echo that this is what we're doing every single day. I mean, during this trial, you know, just this week, right, a ghost gun indictment, Grimaldi's wage theft plea resolution, sex crimes, convictions, all sorts of work that's being done by phenomenal public servants. So we're before you today on this obviously consequential matter, but this is what we do every day. We follow the facts and the law without fear or favor.
If a jail sentence is in the cards, it is likely that Trump and his attorneys would seek a stay on enforcement of that sentence pending appeal. If that were the scenario, would your office object to staying the sentence?
I'm going to let our words in court speak for themselves when we get to the sentencing matter. I'm not going to address hypotheticals. They raise arguments, we'll respond. And I think your question really underscores an important point. This is an active, ongoing matter, right? We have other phases of this going ahead. We will continue to do our speaking about this matter, about issues like that in court.
All right, last one.
From day one, kind of the viability of this case has been questioned in all sorts of media outlets, all over the place, including from the defendant himself. Can you respond to any of that, how you feel now that you've gotten the conviction?
So my response, again, is I did my job. And I think particularly I talked about the history of the office. You know, my personal history, I started as a prosecutor in 2003 in the Public Integrity Unit in the New York State Attorney General's office. I served also in the Public Integrity Unit in the Southern District of New York. These are kind of cases I've done personally, and it's a hallmark of the tradition of this office that I'm proud to lead. And I don't want to go into the whole body of litigation, but we now have a federal court decision ruling on the legal theories. We had a state court decision on the omnibus motions. But most importantly, today, we have the most important voice of all, and that's the voice of the jurors. They have spoken. Donald J. Trump has been convicted of 34 counts of falsifying business records. Thank you.
District Attorney, your office has been investigating this case since
Are you concerned about retribution if Trump is elected
That is
president?
Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, whose office has made history in the successful prosecution of a former U.S. president. Donald Trump found guilty today on all 34 counts related to the so-called hush money trial that was at its heart prosecuted as an election interference case, and as such makes it very political. Alvin Bragg asked to respond to many of the comments that Donald Trump and his supporters have made about the political nature of this case, and quite frankly, just not taking the bait. His opening statements talked about the professionalism and the independence of the prosecutors in his office, going back some 90 years, distancing himself from the allegations that this is a Democrat plot, not responding to direct questions about what might happen next, legally saying we will speak in our court filings, saying I did my job. Our job is to follow the facts and the law without fear or favor. And his punctuation point is that the only voice that matters is the voice of the jury, and the jury has spoken. Donald Trump guilty on all 34 counts. A significant legal day, potentially a significant political day. Aaron Blake is a senior political reporter at the Washington Post. You know him from being on this show. Wow. Aaron, we've talked a few times throughout this. What are your thoughts on what happened today and the implications of it?
Well, I mean, certainly it's a day that we've anticipated could come for a number of years. Donald Trump has faced a number of different investigations and legal matters over the years. Of course, he's already been found liable in civil court for defamation and business fraud. So in that way, we're not, it's not completely shocking. But I think the fact that we now have a former president and current presidential nominee of a major party who is a convicted felon is a very significant moment, obviously. And it's going to force a lot of very difficult conversations in this country. Donald Trump has inoculated himself from this moment in a lot of ways over the years by casting all of that scrutiny of him as being a witch hunt and a hoax. And a lot of his supporters buy into it. But to the extent that even a small portion of them do not buy into that, and that this gives them some pause. We have very close elections in this country, and even if 5% of Trump's supporters desert him, that could be a very significant moment.
It's early days, but we spoke to Joe Walsh, who I'm sure you know, the former Republican congressman. He doesn't think this will change things. We spoke with Bruce Heyman, who is the U.S. ambassador to this country. He says this is a complicated day for Republicans, given the way they have become so completely loyal to Donald Trump in the face of everything that we've talked about. How do you think this affects the Republicans? Do you really think 3, 4, 5% might shake free of him? Because there is a lot of doubt that it can happen.
Yeah, I think you need to separate the fact that the vast majority of Republicans are going to stick with Donald Trump from this. Right. They're standing by him. They're echoing his claims about this process. But even if 95% of Republicans are on board with that, don't care about this whatsoever, Donald Trump is still ceding significant votes in the Republican primaries. There are plenty of voters who voted for a more traditional Republican in Nikki Haley, and there still are divides in the Republican Party over some of the conduct that they saw over the years in Trump's White House. And so, yes, the vast majority of Republicans are going to stick with Donald Trump. That much is not a secret at this point. If 5% do desert him, and I think the polling at this point suggests that's a very real possibility, at least from what we knew before this verdict, that's a very real possibility, and that could have a very big impact.
Okay, Aaron Blake, I have a million more questions to ask you, but I have 60 seconds left in the show, and they're going to take the network away. So we're going to ask you back, maybe as soon as tomorrow. That's Aaron Blake. He's a senior political reporter at the Washington Post. Aaron, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
All right, just recapping our top story, a history-making day in the United States. Former U.S. President Donald Trump becomes the first former president of the United States to be convicted of a felony, guilty on all 34 counts by a jury in New York that deliberated for less than 2 days on a case involving hush money allegations paid to former adult film star Stormy Daniels through his lawyer Michael Cohen. At its heart, prosecuted as an election interference, Donald Trump is now a convicted felon, convicted of interfering in the election that put him in the White House. I'm David Cochran. This has been an unexpected edition of Power and Politics. I want to thank you very much for watching our show today. We'll be back in 22 hours with the next edition of the show and more reaction on the conviction of Donald Trump. We'll see you then. Stay right here on CBC News Network.
Hello, I'm Sarah Galashan in Vancouver. Travis is away tonight. We continue to follow the breaking news out of the United States. Donald Trump is now the first ever former or current U.S. president to be criminally convicted. After just 2 days of deliberations, a New York jury found him guilty on all 34 charges of falsifying business records. They were in relation to a payment made to porn star Stormy Daniels ahead of the